So we're very pleased today to have Professor Bart Wilson, who is currently Professor of Economics and Law at the Economic Science Institute of Chapman University, as well as the Donald P. Kennedy Endowed Chair in Economics and Law. Bart did his graduate work and much of his early work here at ESL, and we're delighted to have the chance to discuss his work and ESL today. Bart, so at what times were you with ESL? When were you here at ESL?
So I started as a graduate student in '92 and defended my dissertation in 1997. And then I came back in November of '98 as a research scientist to go back on the academic market, and left in May of 2001.
I see. So who were your colleagues here at the time?
So, Stan Reynolds was my chair. Vernon, Jim Cox, Ron O'Haka, and Price Fishback, kind of other people I worked with and closely. Mark Walker as well. Okay. Those were the colleagues.
And you overlapped with which other graduate students?
Oh, so Jason Shackett was a year ahead of me. David Dickinson was in my cohort. Melissa Thomason, she did more economic history. So before and after me. Sam Dinkin was a couple of years around me. I don't remember exactly when.
Okay, very good. So tell us a bit about the research you were doing back then. What research did you do here at ESL in your time here?
So I was interested in how industrial organization markets would respond to demand shocks, and so how prices adjusted over the business cycle. And I took a design by Charlie Holt and Doug Davis that looked at market power. It was a very carefully designed game about how market power worked. And I looked at how changes in demand would affect the pricing strategies. And that theory was that when demand drops, the capacity constraints would be such that firms would want to compete all the way down to marginal cost. So that would make prices less flexible, and that could possibly be one explanation for macroeconomic implications. And that was kind of what my dissertation was about in terms of the experiments. I tried some other neo-Keynesian type market experiments, but they are way too complex and way too. It was fun, but it wasn't going to go anywhere. And
I always liked those experiments.
Oh, I did. I loved it. I think I was not creative enough, I think, to handle the problem. I was too structured by the one games I looked at. No, I think that's what grad students are like. You learn this tool, you're going to use this tool. That experiment kind of was the focus that when I returned. My major project working with Steve Recenti and Vernon Smith was on electric power deregulation. And so I used the basics of that design and embedded it in a network experiment and looked at questions of blackouts and things in electric.
So those must have been very complicated experiments by the standards of the time.
Oh yes, yes.
Very
so
challenging.
They had all the line losses going on in there, and so we put line constraints in there. We have market power constraints changing around ownership of the types of generation. That experiment took probably a year when I arrived, and they already started designing it before I got here to kind of get in place. The exciting part was we had our first set of results in May of 2000, where Vernon and Steve were really interested. They'd done a lot of two-sided auction experiments. They knew kind of how we want to see what happens if you put them in these market power environments and line constraint environments. What does this do when there's a surge in demand? And so in May 2000, we showed that just having a little bit of interruptibility of the demand would basically curtail the market power that any of these sellers could, unilaterally impose on them, and you could avoid blackouts. This was literally the month before California had these major blackouts. And so we had these results, and Vernon's and Steve's geniuses, they knew this is a possibility. We just didn't know till that. Now the paper didn't get published until 2003, so that kind of didn't get noticed, but I got these results, I'm like, this is pretty strong, and sure enough, 1 month later, like, here's what's really going on.
That's really interesting. So maybe you can tell me a bit about the technology used at that time, right? How running an experiment back then differs from the way you would run one now.
Oh, so Visual Basic was just a lot more basic. It would take Richard Kaiser a lot longer in order to do these very complex electricity markets to keep the connections and record all the data that, we're doing lots of repeated interactions with a lot of data going through a network of flows with an optimization program that's meant to mimic how actual electricity flows. That took a lot of time to develop. As solvers get better and better and be able to incorporate it, even 5 years after I left, those experiments were a lot easier to implement. The kind of ability to launch the programs, I think, has changed. They had to go out to every machine, click around to start it up. That's fine. It's a nice ritual. But now you can just do it from your.
You get some exercise.
Yeah,
that
get
way.
some exercise. But as I've been telling the younger faculty, the biggest thing that has changed is how to get subjects. Like, I had, for my dissertation and all the other research experiments, I went to classrooms and went to the big classrooms, with 300 students and give my pitch in the front of the room and get sign-ups, and then the night before call them all up again, could confirm. Email was coming in at the end. I'm really dating myself. And that got, but it wasn't as sure that they're going to respond and see that, so you still had to call, and that has just changed remarkably.
It certainly has. Yeah. So how was your experience at ESL, your time, your influence, your later research afterwards?
So what was unique about the time in the 90s, I was thinking about this coming back and walking into this building, this was a time when there are a lot of theorists who were coming to Arizona, who were all just doing experiments then. And you had the kind of Jim Cox and Mark Isaacs and Vernon Smith, who were that's all they were doing by the time I got here. But it was kind of infectious. Like, people were coming to the department to do experiments and do lots of different things. It was that time where, I came right after the basic market experiments that Vernon had run with Arlie Williams. And things were now moving into game theory. Game theory was taking off, and that was it was exciting as a student to see all these different faculty pick up all these different ideas, and that was what I saw was people looking at many different problems. Like, you were not discouraged if you're going to do a problem. Can an experiment help us with this? Which is why I started thinking about, maybe think about macroeconomics. Turns out macroeconomists were not ready. And I wasn't ready to engage them because I didn't know how to engage them on their terms.
Oh, that's very interesting. So kind of sticking with this theme, so did you have a feeling in the 1990s when there was when this enthusiasm that you've mentioned existed to run experiments on many different topics, did you have an inkling that experimental economics was going to be really huge, was going to be a major field later on? Did you have a feeling you were part of something big that was just getting going?
Yeah, and mainly by the visitors that came through. There are lots of people wanting to come through to talk with everyone here about experiments, but also the way the Economic Science Association meetings being here in Tucson, and there was a palpable excitement of all these different sessions, and I watched it grow from my 5 years. Right before me, I think, is more or less when it started, and that seems small. And now seeing a couple hundreds of people getting together regularly around the world, that is different. The other thing I noticed, so started at the end of my career, was the visiting graduate student workshop in experimental economics, because there were many students who were interested in experiments but didn't have a faculty at their institution to guide them, or they had only one. That has changed. Now there are 2, 3 very common all over the place, and so you got that sense that that was going to be one generation. They're going to create the next generation, and that workshop is still going on. And now we have second generation, even in some cases, third generation grad students coming in to it.
So it's I get the sense that you're really emphasizing how ESL really contributed to the development of experimental economics.
Yeah, this is where people came to run their ideas. If they're working on an experiment, they came to the seminar series, and and it was well attended. I mean, the faculty all came to these kind of things. I remember when Catherine Eckel came to visit, spent a lot of time here thinking about what she was going to do with experiments, and came here. This was the place, and that's why I came here.
You came here with the intention of doing experimental economics.
I read about it in an undergraduate. I went to the University of Wisconsin-Eau Claire. I had an advanced topics in microeconomics course where you'd read about different things you could cover in grad school, and one was this thing called experimental economics. I had to read about it, report back to the group, and I read these papers by Vernon Smith. I read also the Battaglio, Kegel, and Green animal experiments. When it came to go to apply to grad school, like, where's this Vernon Smith person? Oh wow, there's other people doing it here. This is the place I want to go. So I got an offer. I'm like, I grew up in the Midwest, but I'm like, I'm headed west. Going.
So you had no prior experience with experimental economics, but
Just reading
you were
it.
just attracted to it because it's so interesting.
It was the canonical double auction experiment that was very powerful. That you didn't have to have all these things that were taught over and over in my courses and in my textbooks. You didn't need all those things, and somehow it still worked. Why? And you could create your own data. That was kind of appealing.
So can you think of any kind of funny or unusual experience that happened here at ESL during your time here?
So I remember in this monitor room running a new. This is at the end of my graduate career. I was piling a new idea about how people might use sell below cost to drive out their rivals. And I had this new kind of basic I/O structured experiment. I was running out in the lab, and I set it up, and there was this hand, and I could sense this tenseness like I've never seen before. And I'm saying, what's going on here? Something just didn't feel right. When you run experiments, there's a general feel about how things go. And this was really odd. And I'm like, what's going on here? I'm sitting at that monitor station. I'm looking like, what's going on here? These people are like really, I don't want to say stressed, but they were intense. And I started thinking, like, what was the change? What's going on here? Like, did my screen in a monitor says they're paid out in cents? Did the decimal point not get carried on the subject machines? So I walked out there, and sure enough, they're getting in dollars, 100 times the stakes of what I thought they were getting paid on the monitor machine. And so I'm like, oh, what do I do? And so that's why they were so into it. Like, they're making a decision for $80, $100 each period. Like, ran back here. I think Steve Backerman, Sean Lemaster, one of them. I said, like, just end the experiment right now. We paid him out. We paid out $1,000 for a few periods of an experiment, but it was that was when I learned that make sure the programmer and you are on the same page with the decimal points. And they were very happy subjects that day. We had
it for recruitment for subsequent sessions.
And as I learned later, colleague Dave Porter, who was here for a while too, said, until you waste $1,000, you haven't become a real graduate student in experimental economics. I did it that day.
Well, Bart, thank you very much for talking with us. It's been a real pleasure. Thank you.
Pleased to be back.